I am Claire, 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago my life changed forever when my Aunt Margaret passed away, leaving me everything. $2.5 million, her sprawling Victorian estate, and her chain of boutique jewelry stores. I was still processing my grief when they walked through that attorney's office door. My parents. The same ones who vanished from my life 15 years ago without a trace. They smiled like nothing had happened, like they had just stepped out for groceries instead of abandoning their 13-year-old daughter. "We are your legal guardians," my mother Susan announced with that sweet voice I remembered from childhood bedtime stories. "We are here to help you manage this overwhelming situation." Then my lawyer William entered the room, and I watched their confident smiles crumble into something that looked like pure terror. But before I dive into this wild story, I need you to understand how we got here. Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with family members who only show up when money's involved, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Let me take you back to when my world first fell apart. I remember thinking my life was perfectly normal until the day I turned 13. We lived in a cozy 3-bedroom house in suburban Ohio, with parents who seemed to love me deeply. Dad Robert worked as a regional sales manager for an electronics company, bringing home stories of his business trips and client meetings. Mom, Susan, taught kindergarten at the local elementary school, always coming home with funny stories about her students and art projects covered in glitter. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. Saturday morning pancakes that Dad would flip too high just to make me laugh. Summer road trips to national parks where we'd camp under the stars. Christmas mornings that started with hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls before the present unwrapping began. Movie nights where we'd build blanket forts in the living room and argue over whether to watch comedies or adventure films. But there were warning signs I was too young to recognize. The hushed conversations that would stop the moment I entered a room. The mysterious phone calls that sent Dad pacing outside on the back porch. The increasing number of late nights when he'd come home smelling like cigarettes and something sharper that I later learned was whiskey. Dad had always enjoyed poker nights with his coworkers. It seemed innocent enough at first, just guys bonding over cards and beer in someone's garage. Then those friendly games evolved into weekend trips to riverboat casinos. I started overhearing Mom crying behind their bedroom door, pleading with him to stop before we lost everything. He'd promise he would quit, swearing on my life that this was the last time. But promises were like poker chips to my father, easy to toss around and even easier to lose. Mom began changing too. Her bright morning energy dimmed into something fragile and distant. She started calling in sick to work more frequently, spending entire days in bed with the curtains drawn tight. Our refrigerator grew emptier, and when I asked about grocery shopping, she'd snap at me to make do with whatever we had. Some evenings I'd catch her staring at me with this strange intensity, like she was trying to memorize my face before breaking into tears and locking herself in the bathroom. I tried desperately to be the perfect daughter. I maintained straight A's without being asked, kept my room spotless, never complained about wearing the same 3 outfits in rotation until they were practically threadbare. I convinced myself that if I could just be good enough, smart enough, quiet enough, everything would return to normal. If I didn't ask for anything, maybe they wouldn't have any reason to leave. The day they disappeared remains burned into my memory with painful precision. It was a Wednesday in September, unusually cold for early fall in Ohio. I woke up late because Mom hadn't come to wake me for school like she had every morning for 13 years. The house felt immediately wrong, too quiet, too empty, like the life had been sucked out of it overnight. Their bedroom door stood wide open, which was strange because Mom always kept it closed during what she called her difficult days. The closet doors gaped open too, with half the hangers empty and swaying slightly in the breeze from the air conditioning. Their dresser drawers were pulled out completely, with only a few forgotten socks, and Dad's old college t-shirt remaining. The kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker we used every morning, I found a single piece of notebook paper with Mom's careful handwriting. The note that would haunt me for years. "Claire, we can't do this anymore. Your Aunt Margaret will take care of you now. We're sorry." Just like that. 13 years of my life reduced to 17 words written in blue ballpoint pen. I called Mom's cell phone over and over, each unanswered ring making my chest tighter and my breathing more difficult. I tried Dad's number next, but it went straight to a disconnected message. I searched frantically through drawers and closets for address books, emergency contact lists, anything that might help me understand what was happening or where they had gone. I had only met Aunt Margaret twice in my entire life. She was Dad's older sister, a successful businesswoman who lived 3 states away in Connecticut. She had never married, never had children, and according to my parents' occasional comments, never really approved of their lifestyle choices. I had no way to contact her directly, and no idea if she even knew what my parents had done. That first night, I stayed awake on the living room couch, afraid to go to my bedroom, afraid to miss their call if they changed their minds. I survived on cereal and peanut butter sandwiches, jumping every time I heard a car door slam in the neighborhood. Maybe they were just testing me. Maybe they'd come back if I proved I could handle being alone. By the second day, our landlord was knocking on the front door, demanding answers about overdue rent payments. When I told him my parents were away on business, he looked at me with growing suspicion and mentioned something about calling social services if adults didn't return soon. On the third day, with our electricity scheduled to be shut off and no money in sight, I finally called my school counselor, Mrs. Peterson. She immediately contacted Child Protective Services, and within hours, a social worker named Miss Campbell arrived at our house with kind eyes and a voice that reminded me of warm blankets on cold nights. She made phone calls, pulled strings, and somehow managed to locate Aunt Margaret in Connecticut. "Your niece has been abandoned," I heard Miss Campbell say into her phone, her voice professional but gentle. "The alternatives right now are emergency foster placement or—" There was a long pause as she listened. "I understand this is sudden, but she literally has no one else. Tomorrow would be ideal. She cannot stay in this house alone another night." That's how my old life ended and my new one began, with a stranger agreeing to take responsibility for a child she barely knew. Aunt Margaret arrived the next morning in a sleek silver Mercedes that looked completely out of place in our middle-class neighborhood. She wore a navy blue business suit with pearl earrings, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a perfect chignon. When she stepped out of the car, everything about her screamed success and control. Her expression when she first saw me wasn't one of warm family reunion or even pity. It was pure determination mixed with what I would later recognize as resignation. "Pack what you can carry in 2 suitcases," she instructed, her voice clipped, but not unkind. "Personal items only. Everything else can be replaced or shipped later if necessary." While the social workers handled paperwork and made official arrangements, I filled 2 borrowed suitcases with clothes, stuffed my backpack with photo albums and my favorite books, and took one last walk through the house that had been my entire world. I stared at my bedroom ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still formed constellations Dad had helped me arrange when I was 7. I touched the kitchen table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together. I breathed in the lingering scent of Mom's vanilla candles. Then I walked away from all of it forever. The drive to Connecticut took 4 hours through autumn landscapes that grew more beautiful and more expensive with each passing mile. Aunt Margaret didn't speak much except to ask if I needed bathroom breaks or if I was hungry. I spent most of the journey staring out the passenger window, watching my old life literally disappear in the rearview mirror while wondering what kind of person takes in a stranger's child without hesitation. When we finally pulled through the iron gates of her property, I understood immediately that I was entering a completely different world. Her Victorian mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with gardens that looked like they belonged in magazines and a circular driveway that could fit 6 cars. The house itself was painted sage green with white trim, featuring wraparound porches and tall windows that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. My new bedroom was larger than our entire former living room, with heavy burgundy curtains, an antique 4-poster bed that made me feel like I'd stepped into a period drama, and built-in bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. There was even a small sitting area by the windows with 2 velvet chairs and a writing desk that overlooked the garden. "Dinner is served at 6:30 sharp," Aunt Margaret informed me as I stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the elegance surrounding my breakfast at 7. "We maintain certain standards in this house, and I expect you to meet them. This isn't a vacation, Claire. This is your life now, and you'll need to adapt accordingly." The rules were numerous and strictly enforced, delivered over dinner that first night while I picked at salmon and asparagus that tasted nothing like Mom's comfort food cooking. Beds made before leaving for school, no exceptions, no shoes on. The hardwood floors throughout the house. Piano lessons twice weekly, whether I showed musical talent or not. Homework completed at the desk in my room, never on beds or couches. Dinner conversation must include discussion of current events and personal achievements from the day. Television only on weekends, and only educational programming. I broke every single rule within the first month, partly from habit and partly from unconscious testing. Maybe if I proved difficult enough, she'd send me away before I could be abandoned. Again. But Aunt Margaret never threatened to get rid of me. Instead, each rule violation came with logical, immediate consequences. Late to breakfast meant no breakfast, with a calm reminder that the kitchen closed at 7:30. Incomplete homework resulted in canceled weekend plans until assignments were finished to her satisfaction. Shoes left on hardwood floors disappeared, until I demonstrated proper care for the house. Behind her rigid exterior, however, I occasionally glimpsed something unexpected. Like when she found me crying over a photo of my parents on their anniversary, and instead of scolding me for dwelling on the past, she silently handed me a tissue and sat beside me until the tears stopped. Or when I failed a geometry test despite studying for hours, and she hired a private tutor rather than criticizing my intelligence or work ethic. The legal guardianship process proved complicated and lengthy. There were court appearances, interviews with judges, meetings with more social workers, and psychological evaluations to determine my well-being and adjustment. Through all of it, Aunt Margaret remained steadfast and present, hiring excellent attorneys and never once suggesting that I should be placed elsewhere, even when the process became difficult and expensive. My parents never appeared at any hearing or legal proceeding. The court attempted to locate them officially to terminate their parental rights, but they seemed to have vanished completely from public records. It was as if they had simply stopped existing the moment they walked out of our house. The abandonment left wounds that therapy could only partially heal, despite Aunt Margaret's insistence on weekly sessions with Dr. Richardson. For months, I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I'd heard car doors slamming, certain they had returned to explain that leaving me was all a terrible mistake. I wrote letters I never sent because I had no address to send them to. I scanned crowds in shopping centers and restaurants, sure I'd glimpsed Mom's profile or Dad's distinctive laugh. Dr. Richardson helped me understand that their leaving had nothing to do with my worth as a person or daughter. Adults make adult decisions based on adult problems, she would explain patiently. Children blame themselves because it gives them a sense of control. If it was your fault, you could fix it. But this was never yours to fix, Claire. Those were logical words that my heart refused to accept for many years. As time passed, my desperate searching slowly decreased. By my 16th birthday, I had stopped turning around every time someone called my name in public places. By 18, I had stopped drafting imaginary conversations for our eventual reunion. By 22, I had accepted that the parents I remembered were effectively gone forever, existing only in photographs and increasingly distant memories. Through it all, Aunt Margaret remained constant. Not warm in the traditional sense, not affectionate like TV mothers, but dependable as sunrise. She never once broke a promise, never missed an important appointment or school event, never failed to provide exactly what I needed when I needed it. It was a different kind of love than what I had lost, built on actions rather than emotions, but it was undeniably real and lasting. Moving into Margaret's world felt like being transplanted to a foreign country where I didn't speak the language or understand the customs. But slowly, methodically, she taught me how to navigate this new reality with dignity and purpose. Moving into Margaret's world meant learning an entirely different way of living. Her Victorian mansion operated like a well-oiled machine with schedules, expectations, and standards I'd never encountered. Every morning at exactly 7, breakfast appeared in the formal dining room. Every evening at 6:30, dinner was served on china that probably cost more than our old monthly rent. The rules weren't suggestions. They were the foundation of an ordered life that Margaret had built through decades of discipline. I tested every boundary in those first months, perhaps unconsciously hoping to be sent away before I could be hurt again. But Margaret never wavered. When I tracked mud through the house, she handed me cleaning supplies and pointed to the mess. When I forgot piano practice, she calmly canceled my weekend plans until I'd made up the time. Discipline creates freedom, she told me one evening, after I'd complained about her rigid schedule. When you master the basics, you earn the right to make bigger choices. Education was sacred in Margaret's value system. When the local public school proved inadequate for her standards, she enrolled me at Hartwell Academy, a private institution with small classes and impossibly high expectations. The transition was brutal. My former school hadn't prepared me for the academic rigor, and the other students came from wealthy families with very different life experiences. I struggled initially, spending entire nights at my desk trying to catch up with classmates who'd been groomed for this level of education since kindergarten. There were evenings I wanted to surrender, convinced I'd never belong in this world of privilege and preparation. But Margaret wouldn't accept defeat. "Your circumstances change through no choice of your own," she told me one night when I was sobbing over calculus problems. "But your response to those circumstances is entirely your decision. You can use this opportunity or waste it. I don't invest in failures, Claire." It wasn't warm comfort, but her blunt pragmatism somehow steadied me. I hired peer tutors with my allowance and formed study groups with classmates. By junior year, I'd worked my way onto the honor roll and earned respect from teachers who'd initially doubted my potential. College applications brought fresh stress and our biggest argument to date. I wanted to attend Ohio State, where several friends were going, but Margaret pushed for more prestigious options like Yale and Princeton. "Your friends aren't thinking strategically about their futures," she said firmly. "They're thinking about extending high school social lives. You need to consider building a career foundation." Our confrontation erupted over dinner one evening. "I never asked to be your project," I shouted, years of suppressed resentment finally boiling over. "And I never asked to be your guardian," she replied coolly. "Yet here we are. I'm trying to give you options your parents never provided." That silenced me. In the quiet that followed, she did something unprecedented. She told me about Dad's childhood. "Robert was brilliant," she said softly. "He could solve complex problems effortlessly, but our parents couldn't afford college. He worked at a gas station while I received the scholarship money. He resented that for years, started gambling to get rich quickly since education wasn't an option. I'm trying to break that cycle for you." It was the first time she'd spoken about my parents without judgment or anger. It gave me insight into their lives I'd never had before, and helped me understand her seemingly cold determination to push me academically. I applied to 8 schools and was accepted at 6. Ultimately, I chose Northwestern University to study business and communications. Margaret paid the substantial tuition without complaint, though I knew it represented a significant investment in my future. College brought new freedom and challenges. I joined clubs, made diverse friends, and discovered talents I never knew I possessed. I had natural abilities in marketing strategy and design that complemented the financial knowledge Margaret had instilled in me. My summers were spent interning at her corporate offices, learning every aspect of the jewelry business from inventory management to customer relations. Our relationship evolved during those college years. Physical distance somehow allowed emotional closeness to develop. Our Sunday phone calls became less formal, occasionally including genuine laughter. When I graduated with honors, the pride in her eyes was unmistakable, though she limited her public display to a firm handshake and single approving nod. I moved back to her house after graduation, taking a position as marketing director for Margaret's jewelry stores. We developed a comfortable routine as 2 independent women sharing space and occasional meals. I dated occasionally, though Margaret subtly discouraged any relationship that might interfere with career advancement. "Romance is wonderful," she'd say when I mentioned someone I was seeing, "but financial independence is essential. Never put yourself in a position where you need someone else's money to survive." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was protecting me from the kind of dependence that had destroyed my parents' marriage and ultimately led to their abandonment of responsibilities. Then 2 years ago, everything changed again. Margaret was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was poor from the beginning, but she approached her illness with the same disciplined determination she applied to everything else. "Everyone dies," she said matter-of-factly when I broke down after receiving the diagnosis. "The only variables are timing and how we use whatever time remains. She continued working as long as physically possible, gradually transitioning responsibilities to me as her strength declined. Our roles slowly reversed. I became the one ensuring medication schedules, arranging doctor appointments, and monitoring proper nutrition. In her final months, a surprising tenderness emerged in Margaret that I'd never seen before. One evening, as I helped her into bed, she gripped my hand with unexpected strength. "You became the daughter I never allowed myself to want," she whispered. "Taking you in was the best decision I ever made." She died peacefully in her sleep 6 months after the diagnosis, leaving me to discover just how thoroughly she'd prepared for this moment and protected my future. The funeral was small, attended primarily by business associates and a handful of distant relatives I'd never met. Margaret had specifically requested no elaborate ceremonies or emotional displays. "Celebrate achievements, not endings," she'd written in her final instructions. Even in death, she maintained her practical approach to life. I stood at the graveside, in a black dress Margaret would have approved of, realizing she had become my true parent in every way that mattered. The grief hit me in waves throughout the following days. The house echoed with emptiness. I'd catch myself listening for her footsteps on the hardwood floors, or saving newspaper articles I thought might interest her. The business continued operating smoothly thanks to Margaret's meticulous planning. She'd spent her final months ensuring every employee knew their responsibilities, and every system could function without her direct oversight. I found detailed instructions for everything from quarterly tax filings to holiday bonus distributions, all written in her precise handwriting. She thought of everything, Dorothy, our longtime housekeeper, told me one afternoon as we sorted through Margaret's personal belongings. Even left specific instructions about which charities should receive her clothing donations and how to care for her garden through the winter months. Dorothy had worked for Margaret for over 20 years, maintaining the house with the same attention to detail Margaret demanded in all areas of life. She'd been kind to me in her reserved way, offering gentle guidance during my adjustment period and celebrating my achievements with subtle pride. "Your aunt was terrified when you first arrived," Dorothy confided as we packed Margaret's jewelry into storage boxes. "She'd never wanted children, never thought she had the temperament for motherhood. The first week after you came, I found her reading parenting books until 3 in the morning. These glimpses into Margaret's private concerns touched me deeply. She'd taken on a responsibility she never sought, but fulfilled it with characteristic thoroughness and commitment." 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a formal letter from William Harrison, Margaret's attorney for over 30 years. The letter was typed on expensive letterhead and requested my presence for the reading of Margaret's will the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning at his downtown office. The letter mentioned that all interested parties would be present, but I assumed this meant only business partners or charitable organizations Margaret might have included in her final wishes. I had no reason to expect anyone from my past to suddenly emerge from 15 years of silence. William's office occupied the top floor of a historic building downtown, with dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that suggested decades of important legal matters. The massive mahogany desk had probably witnessed thousands of life-altering documents being signed. William himself was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses he peered over, rather than through. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the navy blue suit Margaret had bought me for job interviews. William greeted me warmly, expressing condolences again before mentioning we were waiting for additional attendees before beginning the formal proceedings. I settled into one of the leather chairs, flipping through a business magazine without absorbing any content. My mind was focused on practical matters like managing the stores and maintaining Margaret's charitable commitments. The door opened and I looked up, expecting to see one of Margaret's business executives or perhaps a representative from her favorite charities. Time seemed to freeze completely. Standing in the doorway were 2 people I'd convinced myself I might never see again. My parents, Robert and Susan. They looked older, weathered by years I knew nothing about, but unmistakably the same people who'd walked out of my life when I needed them most. Dad had aged dramatically. His once thick dark hair was now thin and completely gray. Deep lines carved paths from his nose to his mouth, and his shoulders stooped forward as if carrying invisible weight. He'd gained considerable weight, his once athletic frame now soft and rounded. Mom looked even more altered. Her blonde hair was cut severely short in a style that didn't flatter her angular face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and when she smiled, it didn't reach them. She wore a dress that might have been fashionable a decade ago and clutched her purse with white-knuckled intensity. "Claire," Dad said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Look at you, all grown up and successful." They moved toward me, and I found myself rising on unsteady legs. Mom reached for an embrace I couldn't return. I stood rigidly as her arms encircled me, breathing in a perfume that was both familiar and completely foreign. "We've been trying to find you," Mom said, stepping back to examine me with obvious assessment. "You look so sophisticated now, so much like Margaret. How did you know about today?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "We saw the obituary," Dad explained, attempting what might have been a sad smile. "We've been keeping track of family from a distance. We always knew you were with Margaret, doing well." And the idea that they'd known my location for 15 years while never attempting contact made my stomach lurch. They'd monitored my life just enough to ease their consciences while building entirely new ones without me. "Please, everyone take a seat," William interjected, gesturing toward the chairs arranged in front of his desk. "We have one more person joining us before we begin the formal proceedings." An older woman I recognized as Dorothy entered the room. She'd worked for Margaret for over 20 years and had been genuinely kind to me during my transition years. She nodded sympathetically in my direction before taking a seat near the window, positioning herself as far from my parents as the room's layout allowed. As we waited for William to begin, my parents attempted casual conversation that felt surreal given the circumstances. "We live in Florida now," Mom offered with forced brightness. "The climate is much better for Robert's joint problems." "I manage a small retail store," Dad added quickly. "Nothing fancy, but it covers our basic expenses." I nodded mechanically, unable to formulate meaningful responses. Inside, my emotions churned violently. Anger, confusion, hurt, and a treacherous flicker of childhood longing all battled for dominance. These were the people I'd spent years searching for in crowds, and now they sat across from me like polite strangers discussing weather patterns. William cleared his throat and opened a thick manila folder. "We are here today to execute the last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Hayes," he began formally. "I will summarize the key provisions before providing copies to all relevant parties." My parents leaned forward slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that suddenly clarified their presence at this reading. They hadn't come seeking emotional closure or family reconnection. They had come expecting money. William adjusted his glasses and continued. "To my niece, Claire Marie Winters, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to the property at 473 Elmwood Drive and all its contents, the surrounding 3 acres of landscaped grounds, my complete ownership, share of Hayes Fine Jewelry valued at approximately $15 million, all bank accounts and investment portfolios totaling approximately $2.5 million in liquid assets, my personal effects including jewelry and artwork, and all intellectual property related to my business ventures." The room fell into stunned silence. I had expected to inherit something substantial, but the scope of Margaret's bequest was overwhelming. She had been successful, but I hadn't realized just how wealthy she'd become over the decades. Dad coughed, lightly, breaking the silence. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison, is there anything else mentioned in the will?" William looked at him over his glasses with obvious assessment. "There are smaller bequests to longtime employees," he said, nodding toward Dorothy, "and detailed instructions regarding annual charitable donations to be made from business profits. But the bulk of the estate passes to Claire, as I have stated." Mom's smile tightened noticeably. "Well, this is quite a responsibility for someone so young," she said, reaching over to pat my hand, in a gesture that felt invasive rather than comforting. Fortunately, as her parents were in a position to provide guidance and support. William raised an eyebrow but remained silent, clearly recognizing the direction this conversation was heading. "Legally speaking," Dad added with practiced casualness, "since Claire was a minor when Margaret took her in, and there was never any formal termination of our parental rights, we remain her legal guardians. We'd be happy to assist with managing these substantial assets until Claire gains more life experience." The panic that shot through me was immediate and visceral. After 15 years of complete silence, they wanted to control my inheritance. They'd abandoned their daughter, but now claimed authority over the woman she'd become. I opened my mouth to object, but William spoke first. "I believe there may be some confusion about legal status here," he said calmly, his professional demeanor masking what I sensed was significant preparation for this exact scenario. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow when I can have all relevant documentation properly organized. Shall we reconvene at 2 o'clock? My parents exchanged a quick glance before Dad nodded agreement. "That would be acceptable. We're staying at the Marriott downtown. Perhaps we could have lunch beforehand, Claire, to catch up properly after all these years." Before I could respond, William stood decisively. "If you'll excuse us, I need a few moments with Claire to discuss some confidential matters related to her immediate responsibilities as a state executor." My parents hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave without securing their position or extracting some commitment from me. "We'll see you tomorrow then, sweetheart," Mom said, again reaching for an embrace I couldn't reciprocate. "We have so much lost time to make up for." As they collected their coats, Dad handed me a business card with their cell phone numbers handwritten on the back. "Call anytime," he said earnestly. "Day or night. We have 15 years of parenting to catch up on." The door had barely closed behind them when I collapsed back into my chair, hands trembling uncontrollably. "They can't really have any legal claim, can they?" I asked William desperately. The attorney's expression was grim but determined. "I think you should prepare yourself for a very interesting conversation tomorrow," he said carefully. "Your aunt anticipated this exact possibility, but I need tonight to organize her contingency plans properly." Despite William's advice to wait until our meeting, I agreed to have dinner with my parents that evening. Part of me needed answers only they could provide, even though my instincts screamed that this was a mistake. I chose Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant Margaret had favored for business meetings. Public, elegant, and with enough ambient noise to mask any emotional outbursts. They were already seated when I arrived, Dad standing to pull out my chair with exaggerated courtesy that felt performative rather than genuine. Mom had applied fresh makeup and styled her hair, looking more like the woman from my childhood memories. "We ordered a bottle of Chianti," Dad announced proudly. "I remember your mother always enjoyed Italian wine with dinner." "I don't drink alcohol," I replied, requesting water instead. It was a small boundary to establish, but it felt important to demonstrate that I wasn't the helpless child they'd abandoned. Awkward small talk dominated the first 20 minutes. They asked surface-level questions about my education, career, and social life. I provided minimal answers while studying their faces for glimpses of the parents I'd once loved unconditionally. "We owe you an explanation," Mom finally said, reaching across the table for my hand. I kept mine firmly wrapped around my water glass. "What we did was unforgivable," Dad continued, staring down at his pasta. "We were in a terrible place financially and emotionally. I had gambling debts with dangerous people demanding payment. Your mother was suffering from severe depression. That medication wasn't helping. We convinced ourselves you'd be better off with Margaret," Mom added, tears forming in her eyes. "She had money, stability, everything we couldn't provide. We thought we were protecting you from our dysfunction." "You had yourselves," I said quietly. "That's all I wanted back then." Dad looked genuinely pained. "I've been in recovery for 8 years now. Gambling addiction treatment, therapy, the whole program. Your mother found the right medication combination eventually. We've built a modest but stable life in Florida." "We thought about reaching out so many times," Mom insisted, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "But we were ashamed of what we'd done, and as more years passed, it became harder to know how to bridge that enormous gap." The waiter delivered our entrees, creating a brief reprieve from the emotional intensity. When he departed, Dad shifted the conversation toward more practical matters. "Margaret clearly did well by you," he observed, twirling linguine on his fork. "Better than we ever could have managed. And now she's left you set for life financially. The house alone must be worth over $1 million in today's market," Mom added casually, cutting her chicken into precise pieces. "Plus the business holdings. It's overwhelming for someone your age to handle alone. I've been helping run the business for years, I stated firmly. Margaret trained me personally in every aspect of operations. Of course you have, Dad said soothingly. But there's a significant difference between helping and bearing full legal responsibility. The tax implications alone can be devastating without proper guidance. Mom leaned forward conspiratorially. Estate taxes can destroy family wealth if not managed correctly. We've learned quite a bit about financial planning through our own struggles. I watched them carefully, noting how they alternated between emotional appeals and financial concerns. The pattern was becoming transparently obvious. We could help you navigate these complexities, Dad offered. We've experienced financial hardship firsthand, so we understand all the potential pitfalls to avoid. That's an interesting perspective from someone who abandoned his family over gambling debts, I observed coolly. Dad flinched but recovered quickly. Those experiences taught me valuable lessons about money management. I know every mistake it's possible to make. Mom leaned closer. We have a small condo in Tampa that still carries a mortgage. Medical bills from Robert's treatments haven't been fully covered by insurance. If you wanted to help your parents get back on their feet financially, it would mean the world to us. What exactly are you asking for? I said bluntly. They looked startled by my directness, perhaps expecting the compliant child they'd left behind rather than the adult I'd become. We're not asking for anything specific, Dad said unconvincingly. We just want to be part of your life again, to help however we can. Though if you felt inclined to help clear our mortgage, Mom added quickly, $60,000 would completely change our situation, plus the medical bills Robert mentioned. So approximately $100,000 would solve your problems, I clarified. They nodded eagerly, revealing their true agenda. And what about my problems? I asked. The 15 years of wondering what I did wrong, the therapy costs, the nightmares about abandonment? What's the price tag for healing that damage? Mom's tears flowed freely. We know money can't fix emotional wounds. We just want a chance to rebuild our family relationship. A family relationship that begins with a cash transaction, I noted. The rest of dinner continued in this vein, swinging between guilt-inducing emotional manipulation and increasingly obvious financial hints. I arrived at William's office the following day armed with a sleepless night of research and a growing sense of dread. My parents were already there, accompanied by a thin man with slicked back hair who introduced himself as Gerald Martinez, their attorney. Just a precaution, Dad explained with a tight smile. Legal matters can become complicated when significant assets are involved. William greeted them cordially but without warmth. His assistant wheeled in a cart loaded with expandable files and a laptop computer. The atmosphere felt more like preparation for legal warfare than a family discussion. Before we begin, William said, settling behind his imposing desk, I should clarify my role here. I am the executor of Margaret Hayes' estate and her personal attorney for 32 years. I also serve as Claire's legal counsel through specific provisions made by Miss Hayes. Martinez leaned forward aggressively. My clients are concerned about their daughter's sudden inheritance of such substantial assets. As her legal guardians, they have a responsibility to ensure proper management of these resources. William nodded thoughtfully. That's precisely what I wish to address today. There seems to be significant confusion about legal status that needs immediate clarification. He opened the first file and removed several official documents. Let me walk through the documented history as it actually occurred. When Claire came into Margaret's care, temporary guardianship was established through family court proceedings. Social services documented multiple attempts to contact both parents regarding permanent arrangements. Mom frowned defensively. We were dealing with serious personal issues, moving frequently for Robert's treatment programs. Indeed, William continued calmly. After 6 months of failed contact attempts, the court scheduled a hearing regarding permanent guardianship transfer. Official notices were sent to your last known addresses and published in appropriate legal publications. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We never received any legal notices. We would have responded if we'd known. Interestingly, William said, removing another document. Someone did contact the court claiming to represent you both. A man named Lewis Parker appeared with signed affidavits allegedly from both parents, consenting to permanent guardianship transfer to Margaret Hayes. My parents exchanged a quick glance that confirmed my growing suspicions before Dad spoke. We never authorized anyone to represent us legally. Those signatures must have been forgeries. William adjusted his glasses deliberately. Miss Hayes had similar concerns at the time. She hired a private investigator to locate you directly and confirm your actual intentions. He opened another file containing detailed reports with photographs. The investigator documented Mr. Winters' activities at various casinos in Nevada during this specific period. He also photographed Mrs. Winters working as a cocktail waitress in the same gambling establishments. The color drained from Mom's face as William continued relentlessly. When approached directly about Claire's situation, you both explicitly confirmed your desire to terminate all parental responsibilities permanently. Furthermore, the investigator documented a payment of $20,000 from Lewis Parker to Mr. Winters the day after those affidavits were signed. That was an unrelated business transaction, Dad protested weakly, his confidence crumbling. William ignored the interruption. Miss Hayes continued annual investigations to monitor your situations and determine if reconnection might benefit. Claire, I have 15 years of reports documenting continued gambling activity, multiple evictions, job terminations, and several incidents involving debt collection agencies. He turned to another section of files. Particularly noteworthy are these documented attempts by Mrs. Winters to contact Claire when she turned 18. He pushed a report toward me. 4 occasions when Mrs. Winters called Margaret's home but hung up without speaking. 2 emails sent to Claire's college account with incorrect addressing that were never delivered. I stared at evidence of these half-hearted contact attempts, feeling a strange mixture of pain and vindication. Most significantly, William said, removing a sealed envelope, Margaret left this letter to be opened in exactly these circumstances. He handed it to me. The envelope bore my name in Margaret's precise handwriting. Perhaps you'd prefer to read this privately, William suggested gently. I shook my head and broke the seal, unfolding several pages covered in familiar script. My dearest Claire, I read aloud, my voice steadier than expected. If you're reading this, it means I've passed away and your parents have suddenly reappeared. This is not coincidence. Mom made a small sound of protest, but I continued reading. Over the years, I documented multiple instances where they attempted to extract money using you as leverage. 6 months after you came to live with me, Robert contacted me demanding $50,000 in exchange for not challenging the guardianship arrangement. I paid it against my better judgment, fearing a custody battle would traumatize you further. I looked up briefly to see Dad staring at the floor. He returned 3 years later requesting more money, claiming gambling debts had put his life in danger. I refused and hired security for our home instead. The room was completely silent as I turned to the next page. When you turned 16, Susan called claiming she needed cancer treatment money. My investigator confirmed this was false. When you received your college acceptance, they somehow obtained your email address requesting tuition money for a fresh start. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to continue. I never told you these things because I wanted you to heal without additional betrayal. Now they will likely attempt to access your inheritance through guilt, legal threats, or emotional manipulation. I had to pause, processing this revelation that my parents had been attempting to exploit me financially for years while I grieved their absence. The room remained silent as I turned to the final page of Margaret's letter. William has all necessary documentation to protect you legally, I continued reading. The guardianship was converted to legal adoption when you were 16, though I kept this private, hoping someday genuine reconciliation might be possible. You have been legally my daughter since then, and they have no claim to you or your inheritance. The words hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had adopted me. I had been her daughter for 12 years without knowing it. Whatever you decide regarding relationship with your biological parents must be your choice alone, I read, my voice beginning to shake. But please protect yourself financially. Blood relation does not entitle anyone to the rewards of hard work or justify past neglect. Remember that family is built through consistent care and sacrifice, not genetics. I am proud of the woman you have become. Trust your judgment. All my love, Mom. That final word, never spoken between us in life, broke something open inside me. I carefully refolded the letter, emotions too complex to name flooding through me. William cleared his throat gently. I have the adoption papers here, legally binding and properly executed through family court 12 years ago. He turned to my stunned parents. I also have documentation of every financial solicitation mentioned in that letter, including recorded phone conversations. Their attorney Martinez looked increasingly uncomfortable, whispering urgently to Dad. Additionally, William continued, Ms. Hayes included a specific clause in her will stating that any legal challenge to these arrangements would result in the entire estate transferring immediately to a charitable foundation for abandoned children. There would be nothing left for anyone to claim. We had no idea about any adoption, Dad said, his voice hollow and defeated. All communications are documented in these files, William replied, patting a thick folder, including your signed consent forms and documented receipt of payment. Dad's face darkened with anger. This is ridiculous. You people paid us off and stole our daughter through legal manipulation. I believe the security cameras in this office are recording that outburst, William noted calmly, which directly contradicts your previous statements about forgery and could constitute admission of accepting payment to transfer parental rights. Dad stood abruptly, his composure completely abandoned. This isn't over. We have rights as her biological parents. Dad, I said, the word feeling strange after so many years. I found Margaret's private files last night. I know about the other families too. His expression faltered completely. What other families? The Thompsons in Colorado, the Gonzalez family in Arizona, 3 other families you approached over the years, claiming to be relatives of recently deceased wealthy individuals. It seems abandoning children and attempting to cash in on their inheritances has been your established pattern. Mom began crying, in earnest. That's not true. We made terrible mistakes with you, but we would never— Save it, I interrupted, suddenly exhausted by their performance. Margaret documented everything. She even has recordings of your phone calls demanding money. Did you really think she'd leave me unprotected after everything you put us through? Dad's rage shifted to desperate calculation. Listen, Claire, there's been a terrible misunderstanding here. We can work this out as a family. No need for attorneys and accusations. I think we're finished here, I said, standing. William, is there anything else legally required of me today? No, he answered firmly. The estate transfers to you completely. Your biological parents have no legal standing to challenge the will or the adoption. Then I'd like them to leave immediately. Claire, please, Mom begged, reaching for me. Just give us one chance to explain properly. 15 years, I said quietly. You had 15 years to explain. Instead, you waited until there was money involved. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. William pressed a button on his desk, and 2 security officers appeared. These gentlemen will escort you out, he informed my parents. Any further contact with Miss Winters should be directed through my office. You can't do this, Dad shouted, his face reddening. She's our daughter, our flesh and blood. No, I corrected him. I was your daughter. Now I'm Margaret's, and she taught me to recognize value beyond price tags. As security led them toward the elevator, Mom turned back desperately. This isn't who we raised you to be. We gave you life. And Margaret gave me everything else, I replied, including protection from people who see relationships as financial transactions. After they'd gone, I collapsed into a chair, emotional exhaustion overwhelming me completely. William sat beside me rather than behind his imposing desk. You should know, he said gently, that I'm also your godfather. Margaret asked me to accept that role when she adopted you. I promised her I'd continue looking out for your interests after she was gone. This unexpected connection to Margaret brought fresh tears to my eyes. Why didn't she ever tell me about the adoption? I asked. She worried you might feel she was trying to replace your parents rather than simply protecting you legally. She wanted you to form your own opinions about family without her influence. Despite the restraining order being filed, my parents appeared at Margaret's house that evening. I saw their rental car pull into the circular driveway as I was preparing dinner in the kitchen. For a moment, I considered ignoring them completely, but a strange calm had settled over me since the meeting with William. I needed this final confrontation to end things properly. They rang the doorbell repeatedly until I opened the door, remaining firmly on the threshold to block their entry. "You cannot be here," I said firmly. "A restraining order has been filed against you both." "We're still your parents," Dad shouted, his earlier polish completely abandoned. "You owe us the basic decency of a conversation without lawyers and security. Guards interfering." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied evenly, "but I'll give you 5 minutes to say whatever you came to say. Then you need to leave before I call the police." Mom pushed past me into the foyer despite my objection, her eyes darting around assessingly to take in the home's expensive interior details. "We just want to understand why you're being so heartless," she said with dramatic tears. "We made a terrible mistake years ago, but we're trying to make genuine amends now." "By attempting to control my inheritance?" I asked. "That's an interesting approach to making amends." Dad followed her inside, his face flushed with anger. "That woman poisoned you against us completely," he spat. "Margaret always resented me for being the favorite child. She used you to hurt me personally." "Margaret saved me," I corrected. "She gave me stability, education, and self-respect. She taught me that love is demonstrated through consistent actions, not just convenient words." "We loved you," Mom insisted desperately. "We were sick people. Depression is a real medical condition. Robert's gambling was a legitimate addiction. We needed professional help, not judgment." "I was 13 years old," I reminded her, my voice finally breaking. "I needed parents who stayed, not excuses for why they left. Do you have any idea what it was like to wake up and find you both gone? To wait by the phone for days hoping you'd call? To search the apartment for clues about where you disappeared to?" Dad looked away, unable to meet my direct gaze. "I checked the mailbox every single day for months," I continued, years of suppressed words finally pouring out. "I kept thinking you'd at least send a birthday card or Christmas present, some sign that you remembered I existed somewhere in the world." "We thought about you constantly," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "Thoughts without actions are completely meaningless," I replied. "Margaret never once told me she loved me, not a single time in 15 years. But she showed up every day for doctor appointments, school plays, nightmares, and college applications. She built trust through consistency." "We're here now," Dad said, his tone softening to the salesman's pitch I remembered from childhood. "We can build a real relationship going forward. Support each other as families should." "You're here now because Margaret died wealthy," I stated flatly. "If she'd died poor, would you have bothered finding me?" Their silence was answer enough. "William showed me the private investigator reports," I said. "You knew exactly where I was for 15 years. You chose not to contact me until there was financial incentive." "That's not fair," Mom protested weakly. "We were ashamed of what we'd done. We didn't know how to face you after abandoning our responsibilities. Yet you found the courage immediately, after learning about a multi-million-dollar inheritance," I observed. "Interesting timing." Dad's face hardened again. "You have no idea what we've suffered, living in poverty while my sister enjoyed wealth that should have been shared with family." "Margaret built that wealth herself," I countered. "She worked 16-hour days for decades building her business. What exactly did you contribute to deserve any share?" "I'm her brother," he shouted. "And your father. Biology isn't an entitlement." "Program," I said, Margaret's pragmatic influence evident in my response. "You can't abandon your responsibilities for 15 years and then show up expecting rewards." Mom collapsed onto an antique chair, sobbing dramatically. "How did you become so heartless? This isn't how we raised you." "You didn't raise me," I reminded her firmly. "You left before that job was finished. Margaret completed it." Security lights flashed outside as a patrol car pulled into the driveway. I'd asked William to arrange periodic checks on the house, anticipating exactly this confrontation. "That's the police," I informed them. "You should leave immediately." "This isn't over," Dad threatened, grabbing my arm roughly. "You think you've won, but we can make your life very difficult. We can tell stories about that woman that would destroy her precious reputation." I pulled away from his grasp. "Every threat you're making is being recorded," I said, pointing to the security camera Margaret had installed in the foyer corner. "She put those in years ago after your first attempt, to extort money from her." His face went pale as he realized the implications. Anything he said or did was potentially evidence against him. "Come on," he muttered to Mom. "She's not worth the trouble anyway." Those final words, dismissing me as mere inconvenience, confirmed everything I needed to know. 6 months have passed since that final confrontation with my biological parents. According to William, they returned to Florida after making one unsuccessful attempt to contact local media with fabricated stories about Margaret. The newspaper editor, a longtime friend of Margaret's, immediately called William instead of publishing their lies. The house feels truly mine now. I've repainted several rooms, rearranged furniture, and added personal touches that reflect my own taste while honoring Margaret's elegant sensibilities. The formal dining room now doubles as my home office, with modern monitors sitting on the antique mahogany table where Margaret once hosted business dinners. The jewelry business continues thriving under my leadership. I've implemented modernization strategies Margaret had resisted, particularly in online marketing and social media presence. Our web sales have increased dramatically, and we've opened 3 new locations. The employees who knew and respected Margaret have transferred that loyalty to me, many expressing that they see her influence in my management approach. The most meaningful project has been establishing the Margaret Hayes Foundation for Abandoned Children. Using a portion of my inheritance, I created a nonprofit organization that supports children who've experienced family separation. We provide therapy, educational scholarships, and transitional housing for young adults aging out of foster care. Through the foundation, I've met others with stories similar to mine. Some found reconciliation with their biological families. Others created chosen families from friends and mentors. Each journey is unique, but the common thread is our human need for stable, consistent relationships, built on actions rather than promises. My therapy with Dr. Richardson continues, now focused less on the original abandonment and more on processing the complex emotions raised by my parents' return and their true motivations. She's helped me understand that closure sometimes comes in unexpected forms. The fantasy of reconciliation often serves a purpose in healing, she explained during a recent session. But reality rarely matches the fantasy. Sometimes the greatest growth comes from accepting what cannot be fixed and building something entirely new instead. 3 months ago, I received a letter from Susan. Unlike their previous communications, this one contained no requests or demands, just a simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing and what seemed like genuine regret. I haven't responded yet. I may never do so. The letter sits in my desk drawer, neither rejected nor embraced, while I consider what, if anything, I want from that connection. I found unexpected comfort in relationships I'd previously taken for granted. Dorothy still comes twice weekly to maintain the house. She slowly shared stories about Margaret from before I arrived, painting a fuller picture of the woman who became my true mother. "She was terrified when you first came," Dorothy confided recently as we tended Margaret's rose garden together. "She'd never wanted children, never thought she had the temperament for motherhood. The first night after you arrived, I found her in the kitchen at 3 a.m, researching child psychology books online." These glimpses into Margaret's private concerns touch me deeply. She'd taken on a responsibility she never sought, but fulfilled it with characteristic thoroughness and unwavering commitment. William has become a regular presence in my life as well, joining me for dinner monthly and offering guidance on both business and personal matters. As my godfather, he's embraced a more paternal role than his previously formal demeanor had suggested possible. "Margaret would be incredibly proud," he told me recently as we reviewed the Foundation's quarterly report. "Not just of your business success, but of your resilience. She worried constantly that your early experiences would leave you bitter or unable to trust. Instead, you've channeled that pain into helping others heal." I've begun dating again after putting romance aside during Margaret's illness and the subsequent legal complications. Nothing serious yet, but I find myself approaching relationships with clearer boundaries and realistic expectations. Margaret's example taught me that love should be demonstrated through consistent actions, not merely declared in convenient moments. The most profound change has been internal. The question that haunted me for 15 years, why did they leave me, no longer carries destructive power. I understand now that their departure reflected their limitations and failures, not my worth as a human being. More importantly, I recognize that Margaret's decision to stay, to commit, to show up day after day was the more significant choice that shaped who I became. Last weekend, I visited Margaret's grave with fresh flowers. The headstone is elegant black granite with simple lettering exactly as she'd specified. I had a small addition made after learning about the adoption, the word mother engraved beneath her name. Standing there, I realized that family isn't defined by shared genetics or legal documents, but by thousands of small daily choices. Who shows up when you're sick? Who stays when things get difficult? Who tells you hard truths because they care about your future? Who creates safety rather than chaos in your world? Margaret taught me through her example that true wealth isn't measured solely in financial terms. Real abundance comes from integrity, from commitments honored, from trust built slowly and maintained carefully. These are the values I carry forward as her most valuable inheritance. The legacy she left me extended far beyond property and bank accounts. She gave me a model for living with dignity and purpose. She showed me that chosen family can be stronger than biological bonds. And she demonstrated that love need not be frequently spoken to be deeply felt and completely real. I'll never know if my biological parents truly regret their actions or simply regret losing access to financial resources. In the end, their motivations matter less than I once thought. What matters is the life I choose to build moving forward, the relationships I nurture, and the legacy I create. Have you ever had to redefine your understanding of family? Sometimes the people who choose us love us better than those who are obligated to. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that family is built through love in action, not just words or blood.